Find Michelin tires at this dealer near you because so much is riding on your tires.
Because you're never too old to learn about the weather, watch the Weather Classroom, following your local forecast, only on the Weather Channel. For up-to-date information on the weather that affects you, watch the local forecast. Coming up next, only on the Weather Channel.
The following program is part of Cable in the Classroom, a service of the cable television industry and your local cable company.
This is a special presentation of the Weather Channel.
In which to do so much. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. So spoke America in the year 1776. So speak Americans today.
And so spoke President Roosevelt at the close of his fireside chat, February 23, 1942. Roosevelt delivered that speech during one of the darkest periods of World War II for Americans. He rallied the country by recalling the immortal words written by Thomas Paine during the bitter retreat to Valley Forge. Paine's tribute to those who stand versus the summer soldiers and the sunshine patriots was appropriate in the most literal sense. American soldiers would soon stand in combat around the globe, enduring some of the most extreme weather conditions, their fate often depending as much on the weather as on strategy and strength. But World War II commanders had a new weapon in their arsenal, the fledgling science of meteorology. They could plan strategy according to the forecast. If the forecast proved correct, it could mean victory. By the close of 1943, the Western Allies had driven the Axis forces out of northern Africa and southern Italy. Russia had reclaimed territory in the east. But the main thrust of the Allied strategy had not yet begun. Allied leaders met in Tehran on November 28, 1943. At this historic meeting, President Roosevelt, Soviet leader Stalin, and British Prime Minister Churchill agreed to forge ahead with plans for an Allied invasion of Europe. The British and Americans would attack German forces in northern France, while Soviet troops would launch an assault on the Eastern Front. The invasion, codenamed Operation Overlord, would contain over 3,000 assault craft, 300 warships, and nearly 200,000 men. The target, a 50-mile stretch of beach along the Normandy coastline. The date for the invasion had to take astronomical and weather factors into account. The Allies required a combination of low tides, pre-dawn twilight, and favorable moonlight. Supreme Allied Commander General Eisenhower realized that Overlord had a very small window of opportunity. Many pieces had to fall into place, and one of them, meteorology, was about to play an important part, a very important part in the world's future.
In 1944, the folks didn't have what we take for granted today. They didn't have any satellite pictures, they didn't have radar, they didn't have forecasts generated by computer. But they had begun to learn a great deal about the atmosphere.
Weather balloons were used to collect data on wind speed and direction. A new development in the late 30s, the radiosonde, helped forecasters measure upper air patterns. The biggest problem was limited observations.
Because of the secrecy during the war, very few of those were passed in open. So only the ones that belonged to the Allied, who reported in code, were available to us at that time. So I'd say the amount of observations we got were very, very scarce, particularly from the Atlantic, where the weather came from.
Eisenhower declared the selection of the actual day would depend on weather forecasts. The best tide and moon data gave the military 3 options for the invasion: late May, June 5th or 6th, or June 17th and 18th. Given those dates, the forecasters had to predict the best conditions for the invasion. The next step, select a team that could produce an accurate forecast that would enable the plan to be a success and reverse the tide of Nazism. By April 1944, preparations for the invasion were well underway. Eisenhower and his staff met daily around this table, which now stands at the Eisenhower Library in Abilene, Kansas. Eisenhower knew that destructive storms were possible the year round in the English Channel. So with D-Day fast approaching, he included the head of the forecast team in the group that gathered here. Allied commanders were briefed daily about D-Day weather conditions. Eisenhower selected Dr. Stagg, a British civilian, and an American military man, Colonel Yates, to head a team of meteorologists who would work exclusively on the D-Day forecast. 3 individual teams were formed, and they gave input to Stagg and Yates during telephoned briefings. The U.S. meteorologists were located in London. The British Met team was at Dunstable, and the British Admiralty weather forecasters were based in London. Each office would take turns in leading the briefings. By mid-May, weather conferences between the 3 groups were held 3 times a day. The commanders asked the forecasters for a 5-day forecast, a new discipline for many of them. They also had the added complication of having to forecast for particular days, as determined by the military.
See, we had no input in determining those dates. That was done months ahead of time by statisticians. We based it all on tides and sun and moon. We had no input into that. We would have not chosen those dates.
Each military branch had different weather requirements. The Navy needed light winds, good visibility, and no substantial swell in the English Channel. The Air Force required various types of cloud cover, with minimum heights for different types of aircraft. The Army needed dry ground, enough daylight, good visibility, and light winds. A certain amount of cloud cover was necessary for the safe landing of paratroopers. The Army also needed low tides so the small craft and soldiers could maneuver around beach obstacles and mines. By By early May, practice drills were taking place all over the British Isles. As the troops practiced on land, the Air Force was busy flying reconnaissance missions.
Well, the typical weather reconnaissance was flying, say, 5,000 feet along the North French coast and saying whether you could see the ground and how much cloud was about, and report the state of the sea surface.
This information was used by forecasters to build a picture of what the Allied forces could expect on D-Day. Eisenhower had already ruled out late May because of the lack of time to build up the vast armada. After a meeting of the Allied commanders on May 22nd, the forecasters learned that the date had been set, June 5th, D-Day.
The greatest invasion in modern history, D-Day reaches its climax when Forecast for Victory returns on the Weather Channel.
Have you explored your world lately?
Morgen ga ik in de stille oceaan midden tussen de walvissen zwemmen.
Yesterday I climbed an ancient pyramid.
Viajé a un reino prohibido. In 63 countries, in a world of ways. The Discovery Channel. Explore your world.
You're witnessing a breakthrough in sleep comfort. In the next 60 seconds, you will discover a way to achieve the most sound and healthful sleep your body has ever known. If you suffer back pain, if you and your partner disagree on how firm your mattress should be, or if you simply want a better night's sleep, call now for a free video and brochure. Can you imagine sleeping on air? Imagine a cushion of air supporting every contour of your body so perfectly you wake up feeling better than ever. That's Select Comfort. Not just a better mattress, but a proven better way to sleep, and perfect for back pain sufferers. Look, conventional inner springs can cause painful pressure points. Waterbeds can cause unnatural bending of your spine, but Select Comfort's air support cradles your entire body for maximum sleep comfort. Plus, unlike any other mattress, you can actually adjust the firmness with the touch of a button. Call now. Sleep better on air.
Call now for your free video and brochure, including our 20-year warranty and 3-month trial offer. Call 1-800-776-8400. 1-800-776-8400.
This summer, Howard Johnson Hotels let you wind down while your kids wind up when they play Sega Game Gear free and get free fun packs or game tips videos. Parents get good rooms and great rates where kids stay free. Call 1-800-I-GO-HOJO for Howard Johnson Hotels and relax.
1-800-I-GO-HOJO for special rates like these near you.
American families have made their choice. Once again, they've chosen the Buick LeSabre as Family Circle Magazine's Family Car of the Year. For reasons like safety, dependability, performance, and style, American families chose LeSabre as Family Car of the Year over every other sedan, foreign or domestic. Buick LeSabre, the American family car.
In his memoir, Crusade in Europe, Eisenhower writes that the consequences of delaying the invasion beyond the June 5th window were almost terrifying to contemplate. Secrecy would be lost, and putting the huge invasion force on hold would be a logistical nightmare. The tension, he wrote, was made even worse by the fact that the one thing that could give us a disastrous setback was entirely outside our control. As May turned to June, it looked as though his worst fears might be realized. In early June 1944, as practice drills were increased, the spring-like weather in the English Channel started to deteriorate. The Allied commanders and the team of forecasters were about to question the 5th as a safe day to launch the invasion.
Cloud base was generally 500 feet or less. Very poor visibility underneath it. And not the sort of weather that bomber aircraft and fighters needed in order to bomb the daylights out to the beaches where we're going to invade.
Weather briefings to the Allied commanders increased to 2 a day as the outlook for the 5th became questionable. Forecasters located a cold front. They predicted it would sweep through the English Channel, causing high winds and low clouds, impossible conditions for an invasion. The 3 forecast centers disagreed on the timing of the front. But by early Sunday, they had come to a consensus. Stagg, head of the forecast team, reported to Eisenhower that the storm would sweep through on the night of the 4th and linger on into the 5th. Eisenhower ordered a 24-hour postponement. Some of the massive force was already at sea.
You couldn't see anything. The deck of the ship, and I guess the railing was about 3 feet above the deck, and you'd look over the railing and all you could see was the waves up above you. You couldn't see anything else.
As troops continued to board ship, meteorologists debated over the outlook for June 6th. The front had pushed well into France, but arguments continued over how rapidly the weather would clear up. The Americans said that the weather would be good enough. The British Met Office was more pessimistic. The Admiralty thought it was worth a chance. After a heated discussion, Stagg and Yates went with the majority vote. At 9:30 p.m. Sunday, Eisenhower made the decision. Operation Overlord was on. Although the weather was not perfect, it was now or never. The greatest invasion in modern history now hinged in large part on the accuracy of the forecast. The invasion was launched as dawn broke on the 6th. The storm cleared. Assault beaches were cloud-covered but approachable. What the commanders did not know was that the Germans were not prepared for the invasion. German meteorologists produced their own weather maps, which differed slightly from the Allied forces. This shows a weak disturbance moving toward France on June 6th. Lieutenant General Habermehl, head of the German Weather Service, advised that conditions were unfavorable for an Allied invasion. Field Marshal Rommel, who was in charge of the area, felt so assured that he left to attend his wife's 50th birthday party in Germany. German troops along the beaches were put on stand down. While Rommel was away, the German meteorologists amended their forecast, saying the weather would clear on the 6th. But that forecast was left on the general's desk unread. Even so, the landings were far from easy. The moderate winds caused havoc for the landing craft.
Well, it was rough. I remember the ship going in next to us was a landing craft tank, and I don't know what happened to it. We were hollering at them and talking to them, making it disappear.
Low clouds caused problems for the gliders and paratroopers. Many were dropped miles away from the original target and were captured. The battle on the beaches was fierce. 200,000 troops came ashore. Some did not even reach the sand. 10,000 men lost their lives on the Normandy beaches. But the invasion was on.
Realized how important it was and how many lives were being affected.
Oh, I think the immediate reaction was, well, thank God it started. We've been expecting it for several days with increasing tension.
Eisenhower's decision to go was an inspired one, as on the next possible date, June 18th, the worst storm in 60 years swept through the English Channel. Had he waited, D-Day might have been a disaster, as all three teams misforecast the storm.
Within, I think, 8 to 10 hours, it became a gale storm, and it was completely missed, not only by the American forecast centers, but also by the RAF forecast center at Dunstable, and by the Admiralty, too. It was a totally missed storm.
Instead of a storm, the forecasters predicted unusually good weather in the Channel. So the Allies began final work on two mulberries, the artificial harbors for offloading supplies and equipment on the Normandy beaches. The prediction for good weather rested on a buildup of strong high pressure over England, but a tight pressure gradient developed between the high and a low pressure system over France. The wind flow around the two systems sent a powerful northeasterly gale roaring through the Channel. Though the low-pressure system weakened, a second low moved up uncharacteristically from the south, prolonging the spectacular winds.
A Beaufort 11 wind, I think it must be from 74 miles per hour to 85 miles per hour. That's an enormous sustained wind, and it lasted for a long time. It was a very bad storm.
The winds raged for 4 days, churning up 6- and 8-foot waves. Transportation across the channel was shut down, and supplies had to be airlifted to the invasion force. Hundreds of vessels were washed ashore or destroyed. Many men drowned, and the Mulberry at Omaha Beach was wrecked beyond repair. In the wake of the storm, Eisenhower wrote to Stagg, "I thank the gods of war we went when we did."
When Forecast for Victory returns, D-Day is a success, but the Allies remain bottled up on the French coast. The struggle to break out when Forecast for Victory continues.
Sun, snow, rain, or fog. Know what to expect. Just 95 cents a minute. Dial 1-900-WEATHER and connect.
Have you ever felt like men and women are from two different planets? Then get ready to order this video.
If a woman's in a bad mood, the secret to helping her get in a good mood is getting her to talk. If you can get her to talk, the more she talks about what she's feeling, the more her feelings will change.
John Gray is the author of the bestseller Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's been published in 19 different languages and sold over 1 million copies. If you want to understand the differences between men and women, order Dr. John Gray's entertaining seminar. Available now for the first time on video. A $34.95 value. It's yours for only $19.95.
When men talk, it's basically one reason: to convey information to create a result.
Dr. Gray's tools, exercises are just immediately useful.
When women need emotional support, they give us signals. They're very clear to other women, but we men misinterpret them.
Our communication is just so much better.
It's the answer that I was looking for.
Order right now.
For up-to-date information on the weather that affects you, watch the local forecast. Coming up next, only on the Weather Channel.
Believe the one your family loves has only 1 gram of sugar.
Have you ever felt like men and women are from two different planets? Then get ready to order this video.
If a woman's in a bad mood, the secret to helping her get in a good mood is getting her to talk. If you can get her to talk, the more she talks about what she's feeling, the more her feelings will change.
John Gray is the author of the bestseller Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's been published in 19 different languages and sold over 1 million copies. If you want to understand the differences between men and women, order Dr. John Gray's entertaining seminar. Available now for the first time on video. A $34.95 value. It's yours for only $19.95.
When men talk, it's basically one reason: to convey information to create a result.
Dr. Gray's tools, exercises are just immediately useful.
When women need emotional support, they give us signals. They're very clear to other women, but we men misinterpret them.
Our communication is just so much better.
It's the answer that I was looking for.
Order right now.
I always said I'd come back here. And minor arthritis pain wasn't going to hold me back. Not as long as I have my Ultra Strength Bengay. It has 3 pain relievers. They only have 1. It's the strongest Bengay ever for deep, penetrating warmth right where it hurts to help the pain go away. Because to me, retirement has nothing to do with doing nothing. Ultra Strength Bengay, nothing stronger.
The June storm was a serious blow to the Allies' supply buildup on the Normandy coast. Nevertheless, by the start of July, over 1 million men had been landed, along with nearly 600,000 tons of supplies and over 170,000 vehicles. A formidable force, but it was boxed in with nowhere to go. The giant hedgerows and swamps of the Normandy countryside hampered Allied mobility, while at the same time providing superior defenses for the Germans. Allied infantry fought hedgerow to hedgerow against the battle-toughened soldiers of Rommel's Army Group B. Progress was slow and bloody, and the stormy weather continued on the continent.
They had a lot of weather, and as I told many people, it was mostly bad. The reason for it were severalfold, but one of the principal was the proximity of the water, the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. And that introduces the moisture into the air, and that's where you get the clouds and the weather and the rain.
The Allies desperately needed to break out of the hedgerow country. In mid-July, the commander of the U.S. troops, General Omar Bradley, felt he finally had the position needed to launch a forceful assault, Operation Cobra. American forces held a 7,000-yard line from the town of St. Lo westward to the coast. The key to Bradley's plan was intensive bombing of an area west of St. Lo. Bradley hoped to blast a hole through German defenses, allowing our forces to push through to the roads and open countryside beyond. The plan's dependence on bombing meant the weather would be critical.
Visual bombing was almost a necessity in those days, and so the cloud cover forecast was probably the paramount issue that had to be decided upon by the decision maker, which was the commander.
July 21st was set as the launch date for Cobra, but on the morning of the 20th, the weather took a turn for the worse.
A front moved in off Atlantic with multi-layer clouds, low ceilings, windy, wet rain. So, in summary, the weather was very undesirable for the medium bombers, the heavy bombers, and the fighters.
At midnight, word was passed that Operation Cobra was postponed. The infantry would have to inch onward until the weather improved. But as the system moved inland, it collided with a frontal boundary and developed into a major storm. The St. Lo area was socked in, and it remained that way the 21st, the 22nd, and the 23rd. Once again, a crucial Allied operation was at the mercy of the weather. Eisenhower vented his frustration in an offhanded comment to an aide. "When I die, they ought to hold my body for a rainy day and then bury me out in the middle of a storm. This damned weather's going to be the death of me yet." He described the delay as a period of agonizing tenseness. Bradley was also edgy, fearing the Germans might discover that something was up. Finally, on the 23rd, the weather team forecast clear skies for the next day. Bombing was scheduled to begin at noon. The meteorologist forecast clear skies because high pressure was building into the area. But there was no wind, and lingering moisture from the storm formed clouds, fog, and drizzle. The 24th dawned still overcast and wet. However, reconnaissance reported periodic breaks in the cloud cover over the target. The bombers took to the air.
The weather had not improved any, but the generals, they had such a high priority for getting this beachhead breakout that they sent they decided the bombers would go in even under the adverse weather conditions.
By the time the bombers reached the St. Lo area, visual spotting of the target was impossible. The aircraft were radioed to return home, but some of them bombed anyway. The bombs fell short. 5 U.S. soldiers were killed. 131 more were wounded. We had now tipped our hand to the Germans. Bradley felt he had no choice to give the go-ahead for the next day. All day, the ground around St. Lo vibrated with explosions. Skies were clear as a bell, and though there was a second incidence of friendly casualties, Cobra was working. The next day, U.S. armored units rolled onto the St. Lo road. The breakout was total. The Americans were finally free to exploit the mobile tactics which were their strength. In the weeks that followed, the Allies swept south and east, liberating town after town. In the last week of August, they rolled into Paris. After 4 years of Nazi occupation, the French were delirious. The Germans were on the run. Many predicted the war would be over by Christmas. Barely 3 weeks after Paris, Allied forces were crowding the German border. Our spectacular pursuit of the Germans had literally run out of gas. Supply shortages slowed the advance to a crawl. The gloomy European weather grew even worse. The autumn rains began early, and the region was inundated. Battlefields turned into quagmires. It became a struggle to wage any kind of maneuver.
We pulled our 105 howitzers with what they called a 6x6 four-wheel drive truck. We could not even get them into position in fields without putting chains on the trucks, and in many cases having to winch them and run a winch chain against a tree and actually drag the truck into a position where we could get guns set up.
Through September and October, the Allies fought grueling battles under impossible conditions. Roads were swamped. Rivers were swollen out of their banks.
We had a lot of rain, and that really handicapped the Army because they depended so much on tanks. So they became a convert, and we paid a lot of attention to forecasting the rain, and effects of the rain, and on floods and river crossings, so on. We had a special unit that did that.
On our staff, we had a person who was a soils trafficability man. We called him the mud forecaster. And it was his job to determine whether the tanks could travel. He had a map of the different types of soils that were available in that area, but the soil moisture was completely saturated soil, and so it didn't take very much in the way of traffic to make it impassable.
Allied troops were dealing with one of the earliest and harshest winters in 80 years. The jet stream had taken an early and unusually deep plunge to the south, and it persisted there. A steady series of storms rolled in along the trough, and cold air poured down from the north. The weather was miserable.
It was cold. It didn't freeze, but it was cold. And unfortunately, we didn't have the clothing and definitely didn't have the shoes to keep us from being soaked through all the time.
October turned to November. In Belgium, the first snow fell on the troops of the U.S. First Army. In Italy, Fifth Army slogged through driving rains and severe flooding. And Patton's Third Army was pushing for Germany's Siegfried line of defenses. Using a smoke screen to shield their movements from the enemy, the Army crossed the flooded Moselle River. It had expanded overnight from 50 feet to 1,500, a 50-year record flood stage brought on by the incessant rains and the bombing of a dam upriver. Although it would mean a campaign in deep winter, the Allies felt they had to push forward with a reinvigorated assault. The British to push from the north, the Americans from the south. In the middle, between the armies, lay a stretch of difficult terrain with few roads. The Allies felt it unsuitable for an offensive. Hitler took a different view.
Using weather as a cover, the Germans mount a surprise counteroffensive against the Allies. The desperate Battle of the Bulge when Forecast for Victory returns.
My new denture adhesive is polygrip free. It is free of artificial flavors and it's free of artificial colors. Polygrip free holds my dentures tight. I can enjoy more of my favorite foods. Polygrip free.
Look for money-saving Polygrip coupons in Sunday's paper.
It's a scope of coverage you won't find anywhere else. Watch the next Weather Scope at the top and bottom of the hour, only on the Weather Channel.
She works the night shift for Memorial Hospital. There's no late for work here. No, my car wouldn't start. What does she drive? Skylark. It's sporty and compact. But she drives it because it's a Buick. She depends on it. Night after night after night. Skylark. Because there are times when anything less than Buick quality is a shortcut you can't afford to take.
Oh, summer kind of makes you want to eat outside, doesn't it? But with Long John Silver's new Big Fish Feast, it's no picnic. It's a party! It's our famous Fish and More multiplied to feed four. Legendary batter-dipped fish, fries, coleslaw, hush puppies, plus golden corn. Perfect for a tasteful family outing or an outrageous eating adventure. And it's an outstanding deal for less than $3 a meal. Now at Long John Silver's. And hurry in for our value meal starting at $1.99.
Go fish with Long John Silver's, where America goes for fish.
You're just a bit plain. Let's give you some color, some snap, something a little saucy. New easy recipe from Birdseye, the fresh look for vegetables.
You're watching the Weather Channel. Stay tuned for more details on severe weather in the heartland and gorgeous conditions in New England. Coming up on the Weather Channel.
For up-to-date information on the weather that affects you, watch the local forecast. Coming up next, only on the Weather Channel.
Fall 1944 in the Ardennes, a heavily wooded area in southeastern Belgium, Luxembourg. Even though troops there were right on the front line, they were seeing very little action. PFC Robert Phillips was in one of those units on the quiet front.
They brought them there in this supposedly quiet sector to rebuild them and give the men a rest.
In the Ardennes, troops could take in a first-run movie or perhaps enjoy a mud bath, even though they were already fighting the weather with cold rain and mud. The war for GIs in the Ardennes had become a part-time job.
So they'd patrol in the daytime in jeeps, and then at night they'd pull back to their village strong points and just sort of hunker down there.
Hitler knew that the Allies had a soft midsection.
In late summer, he drew up a plan to strike there and race to the port of Antwerp, cutting the Allied forces in two. But the key factor in Hitler's plan? The weather. In mid-December, Hitler's perfect weather scenario was taking shape. A high-pressure system to the east brought surface temperatures down. Moisture coming in from the Atlantic was overrunning the surface cold air, causing cloud cover and fog. Early on December 16th, the Germans poured into the Ardennes between the village strongpoints.
There was a lot of ground fog, and that helped the German attack because they actually came out of the fog in a kind of a mysterious, scary way, and were right on top of our positions before our people really knew what was going on.
Allied commanders were completely surprised, even though they had received some information about enemy troop movements. In the weeks leading up to the attack, 80% of reconnaissance flights had been futile due to cloud cover. Captain Ted Sedberg was a fighter pilot in the area. He flew many missions over low clouds and haze.
In these conditions, the haze reflects the sunlight, so that if you're above it, it's nothing but bright light flashing back into your eyes. You can't see the ground.
The German offensive was behind schedule from day one. Muddy roads and determined GIs slowed the advance. Cloud cover continued to help the Germans.
In the whole period from the 16th till really about the 23rd, the Germans were essentially free to move on the ground without any interference from our air forces.
As the German troops advanced, an urgent call went out for reinforcement of transportation centers in the Ardennes, including Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division had been regrouping in northern France, and on December 18th, they quickly headed to Belgium in increasingly colder weather. General Harry Kennard was a lieutenant colonel in the 101st back in 1944.
For our men, it was a rough go because these were open 10-ton trucks, and they were so tightly packed that a lot of the trip was made standing up. But we actually moved right out in the morning of the 19th and were fighting on that day.
Meanwhile, east of Bastogne, remnants of the units which took the brunt of the German attack were having trouble in their delaying action due to the muddy roads. Much American equipment had to be abandoned, but the frontline troops had done their job slowing down the Germans. Many fell back into the bastion of Bastogne, and then the snow began to fall. Dorothy Davis was a field hospital nurse close to the front. The weather also made her job tough.
When the roads were muddy or full of snow, it was hard to get supplies, and the most crucial supply was the blood supply. But if you could not get out to get more blood, frequently you would bleed your own personnel.
Sometime just after the 20th of December, Bastogne was surrounded. The 10th Armored and stragglers from the front were cut off. Cloudy skies still prevented any air support, and the snow was piling up around Bastogne as the 101st Airborne dug in. Hitler commanded his generals to take the town at the expense of ruining his plan to push through to Antwerp. The Germans sent a letter to demand that American General McAuliffe surrender.
He said, "Us surrender? Oh, nuts," which was just a saying that he had. And then there was a lot of discussion about whether or not we should reply. Well, yes, we need to reply, and should it be in writing? They wrote to us, we better write back. And then Tony McAuliffe looked around and said, well, I don't know what to say. And I piped up and said, well, what you first said would be hard to beat. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, you said nuts. And everybody seemed to think that was a good deal. So he sat down and wrote to the German commander, nuts, exclamation.
General George Patton's Third Army was in France when they got the call to head north on icy roads and hit the German southern flank. PFC Bill Newman was with Patton.
But all our focus was on Bastogne, you know, the famous quote, nuts by General McAuliffe, you know, ran through the army, and we just felt that, you know, we were invincible.
Along the way to the bulge, Newman and his comrades struggled against the bitter cold.
Us poor guys had to stick the cans into our clothes, next to our belly, try to warm them enough that we could take them out and then chop out the food, melt it down a little bit more in our mouth, chew it up, and swallow it.
In this period, many soldiers in the Third Army received a holiday greeting from Patton on a small card. On the back was a prayer for better weather. It reads, Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee of thy great goodness to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle.
When Forecast for Victory returns, the Battle of the Bulge turns into America's costliest fight.
Hi, I'm Jack Hanna. Join me on Zoo Life to learn more about the animals of the world. Have you ever had a cuss on your head?
It's funny. It's full of fascinating facts. It's Zoo Life with Jack Hanna from Time Life. Zoo Life is a just-for-kids guided video tour to all sorts of animals. Your kids will travel to remote natural habitats and everywhere else animals live. They'll go behind the scenes, starting with your first specially priced Zoo Life video, Talking with the Animals. It's only $4.99.
What's this?
Where else would you meet a parrot this smart?
Truck.
And if you order by credit card now, you'll get animal bloopers free. You're gonna see some of the funniest moments from Jack's travels around the world. Get ready to learn and laugh with Zoo Life.
I'm out of here.
To order your Talking with the Animals, call 1-800-975-1717 or send $4.99 plus $3.49 shipping and handling. Use your credit card to receive the Animal Bloopers video cassette free. Call now or send check or money order to the address on your screen.
If this doesn't tempt your tummy, nothing will.
San Diego looks wild. Call 1-800-701-WAVE. And San Diego's exciting. Call 1-800-701-WAVE. Call now for your free San Diego Visitor's Guide. 1-800-701-WAVE.
Sun, snow, rain, or fog. Know what to expect. Just 95 cents a minute. Dial 1-900-WEATHER and connect.
This year, 47 million people will make a resolution to lose weight and get in shape. 38 million will break it. But there is one way to succeed.
Nordic Track.
Nordic Track.
Nordic Track.
We call people who chose Nordic Track to help them lose weight. Here's what they said.
I have lost 23 pounds and dropped 2 dress sizes since I've had the Nordic Track.
Hundreds of thousands trust Nordic Track to help lose weight and keep it off.
Thanks to Nordic Track, I've lost 12 pounds, reduced my cholesterol. For that, I'm very thankful.
Unlike lower body only exercisers, Nordic Track's total body workout burns on average 890 calories an hour.
Within 4 months' time, I lost 20 pounds. The best thing about the Nordic Track is that it is so convenient. I've never felt better.
Make Nordic Track the weight loss solution you can keep. Change your shape with Nordic Track, the world's best aerobic exerciser. Call today for a free video and brochure.
Everybody needs to own a Nordic Track.
For up-to-date information on the weather that affects you, watch the local forecast. Coming up next, only on the Weather Channel. You're watching the Weather Channel for accurate forecasts at your convenience. Weather you can always turn to.
The Allies were desperate for a break in the weather. None of our aircraft, bombers, fighters, reconnaissance, or supply planes, none of them had been able to get off the ground. This was the scenario Hitler had counted on when he launched the counteroffensive, but it was about to change. December 22nd, 1944, troops in the Ardennes began to hear bombers in the distance. The skies were starting to clear, but relief flights to the besieged troops in Bastogne were still impossible.
We were really very desperately short of everything by that time, and even our artillery ammunition was down to less than 10 rounds per gun. And maybe the most critical of all, we had no medicine at all for our wounded.
It was almost a month-long progression of fronts that came in from right before Thanksgiving all the way into the 16th and beyond, into about the 21st, 23rd of December. And then the high pressure from Atlantic and the colder air from Siberia kind of joined hands, as it were. And that cold air from Siberia definitely settled across Central Europe, which brought the clear skies and the crystalline air, good for flying, good for fighting, and the sub-freezing temperatures.
By the 23rd of December, Patton's weather prayer seemed to have been answered as the troops in Bastogne saw supplies dropped from the skies.
It was a great morale booster, and our people were literally out cheering when the parachute drop came.
Allied planes began to pound enemy positions from the German heartland to the front lines.
At Bastogne, in this area that the paratroopers had been confined, it was really a large triangle. And the German troops were around the peripheries. And as it cleared, the aircraft could strafe along the outside of this periphery. And we shot up a lot of vehicles.
On December 26th, Patton's 4th Armored Division rolled into Bastogne from the south, breaking the siege. But the battle was far from over.
The weather was never a friend to the guys at the front, because even though the weather let up in terms of snow and fog, the cold kept getting worse and worse.
We were very lacking in overshoes, gloves, scarves. We had no white camouflage, as the Germans did. And in many ways, we were not well equipped for winter combat of any kind. And worse yet, this was the bitterest winter that the Ardennes had known in 50 years.
Nevertheless, the Allied forces began to push the German forces back. The counteroffensive began January 3rd and wouldn't be completed for almost a month. And the temperature continued to fall. As the Allies pushed to compress the bulge back to the original lines, Arctic conditions blasted troops on both sides. Even tanks couldn't deal with the ice. The Allies didn't have much experience with these conditions, but some German units had years of experience on the icy Russian front.
You know, doing spotting, I used to see Germans scooting around in the wintertime on the other line. They all seemed to wear a ankle-length overcoat. Many of them had some kind of a white camouflage for the snow. So, you know, they were very hard to pick out.
Despite their experience and equipment, German troops also suffered from the bitter cold. Bill Newman recalls finding a dead German with no wound marks, laid out as if by an undertaker.
The only thing I could figure is that this poor young man had frozen to death. And the other members of his troop, in either retreating or advancing, figured that, well, this is the best they could do for him, and went on either further into the attack or in the retreat. I have to comment, too, that we kind of looked at one another and thought, you know, this is us, too. You know, this could be us.
Frostbite or cold injury was wounding hundreds of troops. If not caught in time, the condition led to gangrene and amputation.
Your marching soldier is out of commission if he has frostbite. And so for the field soldiers, the cold injuries were as bad as being hit by the enemy.
By the end of January, the Germans had been pushed back to where they had been before the bulge began. American losses were reported to be 8,600 dead, 47,000 wounded, and 21,144 missing in action. For those who survived, there are 5 enemies they'll never forget. The Germans, rain, fog, snow, and ice. In the months that followed the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies overran Germany. On May 8, 1945, the Germans formally surrendered. Eisenhower wrote that some soldier once said that the weather is always neutral. Nothing could be more untrue. In the final battle, Hitler gambled everything on the weather and lost.
Next on Forecast for Victory, the war in the Pacific, from Pearl Harbor to the fiery end at Nagasaki, weather continues to be both friend and foe to the Allies.
Hey, I was reading it. Reading what? The ingredients. Okay, what are they? Crunchy little corn balls, no colors, no flavors, no junky stuff. You didn't read that. Yes, I did.
Kids read Kix as just plain good. Moms read Kix as low in sugar.
Okay, then what does this say? No preservatives.
Kix, kid-tested, mother-approved.
Hi, I'm Al, and I man the beach. And man, what a beach! 23 miles of it. A few years ago, they made the decision. Bing, bang, boom, all new stuff. Culture, everywhere. That's right, new. Brand spanking new. Every blade of grass. Not exactly spring break, is it? Right now, you should take a fresh new look at your next vacation. The new Greater Fort Lauderdale and Carnival Airlines, the perfect vacation pair. Greater Fort Lauderdale, Carnival Airlines. It's perfect.
The perfect vacation pair, the new Greater Fort Lauderdale and Carnival Airlines.
There's a place where the humidity can be so thick you can practically cut it with a knife. And spaghetti sauce flies through the air with wild abandon. It's the Dutch Boy Paint Testing Facility, where we put Dutch Boy kitchen and bath paint through over 70 tests to be sure it resists moisture, peeling, and even staining. All to make sure that when you buy Dutch Boy, you're not just getting a paint that looks beautiful. You're getting a paint that lasts. We guarantee it. Give your home the lasting look of Dutch Boy.
If your car isn't performing like it used to, put back the power with Slick 50 Fuel System Formula. 10 times more powerful than the leading fuel treatment, Slick 50 cleans the entire fuel system. You'll feel the difference guaranteed. Ask for Slick 50 Fuel System Formula. More power to you.
Slick 50 Fuel System Formula can be found at the following fine retailers.
Halfway around the globe, Allied forces fought the other enemy, the Japanese. The battleground stretched from the Aleutian chain in Alaska to the islands of the South Pacific, a region with some of the world's most challenging climate. From the very first, the Japanese sought to use the weather to their advantage.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
At 7:55 on a Sunday morning, waves of Japanese aircraft attacked in one of the greatest assaults ever against the U.S. military. The place was Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet base. The success of Japan's surprise attack was largely due to one factor: the weather. A storm system provided a curtain for Japan's carriers and strike force to hide behind as they approached Pearl Harbor. The Japanese fleet's journey to Pearl began on November 26, with
with their objective before them and in the midst of a thick fog and stormy seas, the task force set sail from Tankan Bay. While weather helped the Japanese escape detection during their travels, it also worked against them. Published reports described gales and high seas washing men overboard. On December 2nd, the strike force received a coded message indicating the attack on Pearl Harbor was set for December 7th. The next day, winds and seas were calmer, allowing ships to refuel. After crossing the international date line on December 3rd, about 900 miles north of Midway, the force turned southeastward toward Hawaii. On the evening of the 6th, through mounting seas and the black of night, carriers charged to their designated launch site, about 275 miles north of Pearl Harbor. Published reports indicate that just before dawn, there was a heavy overcast at about 6,000 feet. A moderate sea made the flight decks pitch badly, and there was a fresh northeast trade wind blowing. The rising sun lit the sky for Japanese flyers as they headed to Hawaii. It's reported that when the flight commander's navigator believed the strike force was near Oahu, they ducked under the cloud ceiling. It was a misty morning. Pearl Harbor lay asleep when at 7:50 a.m. man-made hell broke loose. Anthony DiLorenzo was 19 years old, a machinist mate second class on the USS Honolulu at the time of the attack.
All we could see was the 7 or 8 battleships burning, smoke billowing. It wasn't a pretty sight. Of course, our thoughts were, this was the beginning of something, and it was.
More than 3,000 U.S. servicemen and civilians were killed during the assault. 169 aircraft were lost, and 21 ships were either sunk or damaged. President Roosevelt ordered swift retaliation for Pearl Harbor, but there were major obstacles, and it was 4 months before we mounted a strike against Japan's home soil. Finally, in April 1942, a group of B-25 bombers, like this one, on display at the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, took off for Tokyo. The daring mission came to be known as the Doolittle Raid, and it sent America's spirits soaring. By early 1942, the U.S. had no access to bases within striking range of Japan. The solution? Large, long-range Air Force bombers to attack from an aircraft carrier off the coast of Japan, a task never attempted before. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle was selected to head the mission, along with volunteers from the 17th Bomber Group. In April of 1942, the crews and 16 B-25 bombers were loaded aboard the USS Hornet in San Francisco. Their mission? Bomb 5 cities in Japan. The bombers had to take off from the carrier, but as all the planes were crammed onto the deck, only 450 feet of runway remained. Not a very long runway to allow the bombers to gain enough speed for takeoff. The plan was to get the carriers within 450 miles of the Japanese coast. This would allow the bombers to have enough fuel to make it to friendly landing strips in China. There was no way they could return to the carriers. The weather was terrible, high winds and lashing gales, but it helped the task force avoid detection. The ships ran into Japanese fishing boats 650 miles from the coastline. The mission had to be launched early. First Lieutenant Travis Hoover, pilot of aircraft number 2, waited his turn.
On this particular day, April the 18th, 1942, it was the worst day we'd had at sea as far as high seas and wind and gusts. It was very gusty that day, but it did provide the necessary wind flow over the deck to make takeoff possible.
With the carriers sailing at full speed into the wind, plus the added gusts, the planes received an extra boost, just enough for a safe takeoff. The weather cleared over the targets and the raids were a success. But the premature launch caused the planes to run out of fuel well before the prepared landing areas. A strong tailwind helped the planes along, but weather conditions changed.
It turned out that the further we went across the China Sea toward China, the worse the weather got. And it was lousy by the time we got to the coast. And finally reached the coast of China, it was, I think I had flying in rain squalls, fog, and low visibility.
The planes had to ditch. Most of the crews bailed out. With the help of Chinese villagers, the crews made it to safety. The Japanese did capture 8 of the Doolittle Raiders. 4 never made it home. It was 26 months before U.S. bombers flew again over Japan. With the capture of neighboring island airfields, the bombing raids on Japan increased, and it was then that forecasters made a historic discovery. It happened on the eve of a scheduled bombing raid over Japan.
We calculated that the winds over Tokyo would be 168 knots, about 175 miles an hour from the west, and put it on the forecast, and the general didn't believe it. He said, nobody ever observed a wind like that before. You guys must have made a mistake.
Commanders ignored the wind forecast. The planes took off and hit upper-level headwinds of 170 miles per hour. The raid was unsuccessful. High-level winds blew bombs and planes off course and disrupted operations. The forecasters on duty that night had inadvertently discovered the jet stream. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan finally began to succeed when we were able to avoid the high-altitude winds of the jet stream. Commanders learned that the Japanese had no light anti-aircraft guns. That meant we could safely change from high-altitude bombing to low-level nighttime bombing. The results were spectacular and helped turn the tide of the war.
A powerful typhoon devastates America's Third Fleet, and the weather helps seal the fate of a nation. Stay tuned for the conclusion of Forecast for Victory.
For up-to-date information on the weather that affects you, watch the local forecast. Coming up next, only on the Weather Channel.
The Allies' seaborne assault was also challenged by extreme weather for which they weren't prepared. In August of 1942, the Americans landed at Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, the beginning of a two-pronged attack against the Japanese invaders. Ground forces dealt with torrential rains, mud, oppressive heat, and humidity.
We were in the tropics, and the tropical weather, as you know, is not a fast-moving type of weather. It's almost the same almost every day. The real problem in the tropics were the typhoons. And the typhoons took a big toll, particularly from the Navy.
In early December 1944, Admiral William Bull Halsey and the Third Fleet were embroiled in the fight to reclaim the Philippine Islands. The effort resulted in one of the greatest losses of the war. The blow came not from the enemy, but from a deadly encounter with a typhoon. After several days of intense aerial combat against Japanese air installations in the Philippines, Task Force 38, the primary strike force of Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet, was ordered to withdraw and rendezvous with support ships. Admiral Halsey moved the carrier strike force to the east to refuel and replenish the next day. His decision ultimately placed the fleet in the path of a typhoon. The USS Dewey was among ships in the logistics support group that met with forces of the Third Fleet. Her commanding officer, C. Raymond Calhoun, says heavy seas on the morning of December 17th made refueling operations difficult. By afternoon on the 17th, weather conditions had deteriorated, and the ships were unable to refuel. Admiral Halsey ordered all ships to a point 160 miles northwest, which would have been well away from the typhoon's actual track. Commanders were getting reports that the typhoon was positioned about 450 miles east of their location, but they had miscalculated. It was only 120 miles east-southeast.
One reason for that is that every place off to the northwest of the Philippines was occupied by Japan, and we could not get any weather reports from that area at all. And of course, we didn't have any of the modern facilities that we use today. We didn't have satellite pictures, and we didn't have radar.
On the 17th, commanders again altered the location of the rendezvous site. Their last change in course placed them dangerously close to the path of the storm. Dr. Reed Bryson was a forecaster on Saipan at the time of the typhoon. He had received reconnaissance reports that the typhoon was headed toward the fleet.
So I went to the teletype and sent a message to the Fleet Weather Central saying there is a typhoon with 140 knot winds at latitude such and such, longitude such and such right now.
On the morning of December 18th, surrounded by howling winds and raging seas, the fleet found itself in a battle with a full-fledged typhoon.
The cloud cover was ominous. It was the darkest I had ever seen. The color of the clouds almost matched the color of the sea. They were both slate gray. And the size of the seas startled me.
3 destroyers sank. 778 officers and men were killed, and over 100 carrier aircraft were damaged. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, later wrote, "The typhoon of December 18, 1944, was the greatest loss we have ever taken in the Pacific without compensatory return since the Battle of Savo in January 1942. Despite such misfortune, we were reclaiming many of the islands from the Japanese. By spring of 1945, Okinawa had been secured, and 1 million men were massed for the invasion of Japan. But the carnage had been tremendous. President Truman approved the use of a new weapon, which we hoped would end the war without the sacrifice of more American lives." The end came on the wings of a B-29 named Boxcar. It had the distinction of making the final bombing run of the war. The target, a city called Nagasaki. By early 1945, the National Laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico, had become the focal point for the development of the world's first atomic bomb. President Truman wanted the bomb to be tested in early July to coincide with the Potsdam Conference. Weather forecasters had concerns about the bomb being tested during the desert thunderstorm season.
If there's rain in the vicinity, for instance, rain will wash this radioactivity out of the atmosphere and will deposit it in highly concentrated areas, which can be dangerous to people, livestock, to nature. Wind was important because they needed wind to disperse these stuff throughout the atmosphere so that it reached non-critical levels and would be of no health concern to the population of the United States.
Certain conditions were required for the test. No rain within 40 to 50 miles of the site. Good visibility at least 35 miles in each direction with the wind blowing from the northwest to southwest. The test was scheduled for Friday, July 13th, but the weather was not good. By 2 a.m. Monday, storms were still rolling through the area. There was a danger that the upper-level winds could carry radioactive material into the Texas Panhandle. But at 4 a.m., conditions started to improve. The rain stopped. Winds subsided. Moments later, the all clear was given.
The whole valley and the mountains that were 20 miles or so away were just lit up with a real bright light. And you could open your eyes and turn around. Here was a fireball. It just grew and grew and turned purple and red. Fortunately, went away from us.
With a successful test, Army commanders wanted to use the bomb as soon as weather conditions permitted. The first target day, August 4th, had to be canceled because of bad weather over all 3 targets. Forecaster Ed Brewster Buxton was on duty 2 days later.
I can't remember the details except that there must have been the target forecast must have shown target cloud conditions satisfactory, wind conditions satisfactory. I didn't know it was an atom bomb. I thought it was just another, that could have been one of a dozen reconnaissance flights over Japan as far as I knew.
The forecast verified for Hiroshima. The city's fate had been sealed. The second bomb was to be dropped on the 11th, but forecasters said conditions would be unfavorable, so the mission was advanced to the 9th. Nagasaki, though, was not the primary target.
So Kuro, I think, was the first, and I think I had probably the same forecast for both places. They weren't too far apart, but I think I had about 8/10 of cloud cover. That meant there were going to be breaks in the cloud. They ran into haze or something at Kokura, which didn't make it look like a good target. So they continued to Nagasaki.
Conditions over Nagasaki were not perfect, but the crew found a gap in the cloud cover and dropped the bomb. The war against Japan ended the next day. 2 nuclear bombs had caused massive death and destruction. The weather had played a leading role in where and when these nuclear devices were dropped. Down through history, weather has been one of the wild cards of battle. World War II was the very first time we had a shot at predicting the weather, and perhaps using it to our advantage. How'd we do? The meteorologists who were there will tell you they gave it their best, and some of the most critical moments in modern history rode on the strength of their forecast. In the end, well, they got it right more than they got it wrong. Scored a winning forecast, a forecast for victory. I'm Charlie Welsh.
There's a tornado coming to your video library. Now, a re-release of the best-selling title from the Weather Channel Home Video Collection. This is your chance to own The Enemy Wind. 45 minutes of tornado action and 2 thrilling stories. First, follow the exploits of a fearless storm chaser and photographer as he documents the fury of the storm. Then, the Weather Channel production that takes you inside the destructive force of the tornado, The Enemy Wind. How the storm is forecast and the tale of one tornado town. Call 1-800-525-6600 now, and you can own The Enemy Wind for just $19.95. Have your credit card ready and call 1-800-525-6600 to charge by phone, or send check or money order to the address on the screen. Call now, 1-800-525-6600.
Over 800,000 automobile crashes occur in the rain each year. In fact, the Subaru Legacy is equipped with all-wheel drive, the ultimate safety feature. In fact, compared to front-wheel drive, the Subaru all-wheel drive system provides the driver with superior control and better handling on rain-slick surfaces. A fact that's very comforting indeed. Now buy a new Legacy with 1.9% financing or lease for just $199 a month.
Visit your nearest Subaru dealer today to experience the beauty of all-wheel drive.
Sun, snow, rain, or fog. Know what to expect. Just 95 cents a minute. Dial 1-900-WEATHER and connect.
Is your child protected for the future? Gerber, the baby people you've known since you were an infant, offers you a way to help with that protection through their Grow Up Plan for Children. It's a $5,000 cash value insurance program that costs less than 11 cents a day. At age 21, that protection doubles to $10,000 with absolutely no increase in premiums. In addition to automatically doubling at age 21, the plan also guarantees the right to $50,000 of insurance by age 28, regardless of health or occupation. So call now for your free information package. Any child under 13 years of age is eligible. No medical examination is necessary. Simply answer a few questions. As a special feature, your first month's premium is $1. The Gerber Life Grow Up Plan.
To show you care, call now 1-800-543-7500. The information package is free. There is no obligation. This offer is available to parents and grandparents only. That number again is 1-800-543-7500. 1-800-543-7500.
You're watching the Weather Channel for accurate forecasts at your convenience. Weather you can always turn to.
What's got into that cat?
Friskies! And now you can get into the fun, magic, and excitement of Disney's Pocahontas, now in theaters.
It's Mika.
Start with the great taste cats love, filled with energy-producing nutrients to bring out the frisky in your cat. Then enter to win a cuddly friend from Disney's Pocahontas at your store.
I love you, Mika.
Watch the magic come to life and bring out the frisky in your cat.
Hey, so you're having Special K for breakfast?
Yep, sure am.
Well, try Total if you want 100% of 11 of the many vitamins and minerals you need. Try to get the same amount from Special K, and you'll have to add a lot more than just milk.
Like what?
Well, you could start with a little banana for B6.
Oh, banana.
Cabbage for vitamin C.
Cabbage.
chop for niacin, a burger for iron, and some mackerel for B12.
I'll try the total.
Make total part of your balanced diet. One bowl, 100% of 11 vitamins and minerals.
Yeah, it's great.
I always said I'd come back here. And minor arthritis pain wasn't going to hold me back. Not as long as I have my Ultra Strength Bengay. It has 3 pain relievers. They only have 1. It's the strongest Bengay ever for deep, penetrating warmth right where it hurts to help the pain go away. Because to me, retirement has nothing to do with doing nothing. Ultra Strength Bengay, nothing stronger.
It's a scope of coverage you won't find anywhere else. Watch the next Weather Scope at the top and bottom of the hour, only on the Weather Channel.
Well, not a great 4th of July in Chicago, although I think things are getting better. Let's go to lightning tracker and see where those thunderstorms are, at least over the past couple of hours. And as we do, we'll go into the Great Lakes area if we can get to that frame at the current time and see where the lightning is. Maybe we can or maybe we can't. There we go. Thunderstorms have moved through the Chicago area, and it looks like things are going to wind down in the next couple of hours. St. Louis, look out for thunderstorms. I think most of them are going to be north of your vicinity. Looking to Chicago, well over an inch of rain throughout many parts of the city, even some pea-sized hail as well, and all this continue to move to the northeast. Let's go to the 5-day business planner, what time we have left for it. We can see the warmer air trying to get up to the north. Today, I think in New York City, you'll have a nice day, but by tomorrow, more humidity. Thunderstorms in the D.C. area. Look out Atlanta later today. It looks like it's going to be a very prolific thunderstorm afternoon. And the same tomorrow, really, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, even New York City will get into the warm air come tomorrow. Temperature-wise, it stays on the hot side, and it's just going to get hotter for you from Dallas and San Antonio into the Atlanta area. D.C. is going to be hot all week. New York City in the 80s for the most part, and looks like some late week rains for you, then cooling off in Chicago as we move through time. Precipitation will hug the eastern seaboard as a front moves toward Boston and New York on Thursday. Some rain down to D.C. as well. This is going to be a slow-moving front, so look for more in the way of thunderstorms lingering into Saturday around Long Island and New York up toward Boston. Scattered thunder showers or isolated thunder showers in the southeast, and an onshore flow keeping Seattle and Portland a little bit wet and coolish as we move into the weekend. Stay tuned to the Weather Channel. We'll show you where all the storms are and where they're going to be coming right up.
You explored your world lately.
Morgen ga ik in de stille oceaan midden tussen de walvissen zwemmen.
Yesterday I climbed an ancient pyramid. Viajé a un reino prohibido. In 63 countries, in a world of ways. The Discovery Channel. Explore your world.
When was the last time you played in the rain? Let your hair go wild. Flexed your muscles to the world. Stayed up past your bedtime. When was the last time you really had fun in a car? Riviera by Buick. Go ahead. Express yourself.
Whirlpool room air conditioners help create a comfortable home environment for work and play. Our unique dual-flow 12-way louvers direct cool air where you want it. Plus, our Quiet Miser feature reduces distracting noises as your family relaxes. And our exclusive Comfort Guard control keeps rooms at the temperature you like. Whirlpool air conditioners, creating a comfortable environment that helps you make a home run. See your local Whirlpool dealer for details.
This isn't the work of a kindergarten artist. It's the Dutch Boy Paint Testing Facility, where we make sure our kids' room paint will resist your little one's finishing touches. It's one of 73 tests we do, so you can give your home the lasting look of Dutch Boy.
Oh, Cliff, do you have a second? Sure. Listen, I know we're not getting the savings that you expected from our new